This is
Here we're rolling.
Sunday School, and to our listening ears, all angel sings and round us rings the music of the spheres. This is Sunday School.
Brothers and sisters, welcome to Penn Sunday School here at Show Creator Studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. Tonight we have a very special guest here on the program. Robert Klein is here.
Hallelujah.
Star of film, television, and stage with 4 legendary comedy albums. Robert Klein is also in Las Vegas playing at the South Point. We're so happy he found time to stop by and hang out with us right here. So here he is talking with the man preaching the love, Penn Jillette.
I want to start right away by you saying that you were not in the Aristocrats. I don't know why. I'm going to blame Paul Provenza, because from the very beginning we talked about that. And then you said that some reviewer referred to you as a safe comedian, which is exactly wrong.
They sent I would say, I'm a good deal older than you and Teller, and you're, well, we're a generation maybe apart in show business. I certainly took a lot of chances when we couldn't. Genia Belafonte, she's actually an elegant writer for the Times, but she's not a reviewer. Mm-hmm. And they sent her somehow or she reviewed maybe my 6th HBO special out of the 9, and made fun of me, saying how people look like schizophrenics with Bluetooth. I mean, and this is also 10 years ago. People going, yes, right, walking in the street, like an ageist thing. But most of all, the insult that significantly I was not in the thing. And that's not true, because I told you and I told Provenza I would do it. I mean, it's not my style, but I got the joke and it was funny. It was a great idea. It was a funny idea.
But I mean, the direct line. The direct line goes from Lenny Bruce to you.
Well, that's very kind. I'd like to think that he and Jonathan Winters were my main inspiration.
I must say the humility in the documentary, the Still Can't Stop My Leg, the humility there, where everybody says, Seinfeld and Bill Maher and everybody are saying one after the other that you had invented this kind of first-person, political, important kind of comedy. And they give you all the credit in the world. And, of course, this is also the editing, but it felt so much like you. Yeah, the first thing you do is you give it all to Lenny Bruce. First thing you do. And I just respected that so much. Would you talk about how we get from Lenny Bruce to Robert Klein?
Sure. Well, there's Lord Buckley before him. Yeah. The Naz, that's his name for Jesus, who went out of the mainstream. Let's face it, modern stand-up comedy, if you will, is a post-war thing where the image of a guy with cufflinks and going up. But I tell you, my girlfriend's so fat, and they made me laugh. I saw live comedy for the first time in the Catskill Mountains. Mm-hmm. These guys come on and occasionally with Yiddish punchlines. I didn't understand what they were. I tell you, my wife wanted to make love. I said, we can't. We went to the doctor. He said, and I'm asking an old man next to me, Live comedy was inspirational to me, no matter what level it was, because it made a room full of people, for the moment, forget their troubles. I think you do that, too. Of course, all good performers do. You make people entertained for that, time of the period. Now, Bruce was started as a mimic, Jack, my mentor, Rodney Dangerfield, Jack Roy, Jacob Cohen, he and Georgia Schultz, who owned Pip's Club in Brooklyn, and Lenny, and they were all friends. And Joe Ansis, who went into the siding business, never had the balls to perform live.
And you knew Joe Ansis, right?
I knew Joe very well through Rodney. He taught him this Jewish neurotic approach and this kind of hip clip, this kind of rhythmic. Lenny, his mother, worked strip clubs, not as a stripper, but as Sally Mars as a comedian. Yeah. I don't know much about his father. He wasn't your average little Jewish boy from Brooklyn. He went around, joined the Navy, got tattooed, and when he was a wonderful mimic and a traditional comedian, but he started to push the envelope, especially in terms of social issues. How to make colored friends at parties comfortable. Remember that old routine?
Yeah.
Well, that watermelon sure is good. I mean,
Joe Louis was one hell of a fighter.
Jackie Robinson, a hell of a ball player. And you know, when I was a kid in a fraternity, the only one that allowed Jews in this school, we had a few black guys. And I remember we were so sweet but naive to how much we loved Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, that kind of thing. But anyway, getting back to Bruce, he pushed the envelope. He had a definite jazz connection. It was musical, and I guess Jonathan Winters so much appealed to me. Jonathan was completely neutral, politically or socially. This kid fought in the Pacific. Okay, as a 17-year-old, it was his one-man show aspect that both of them had to a certain extent, and I like that approach to comedy. Not just standing in front of a mic. You take the stage, your one-man show. His voices, his improvisations were remarkable, and so that was really, go ahead.
But what fascinates me, I think the modern stand-up comedy to me is kind of invented when Lenny Bruce goes to honest first person. When it goes from not my wife is so fat to my wife divorced me today. It's that change there. And to me, that's where you pick up. Because when you're talking on stage, it is, I guess I can't say always, but it certainly seems like almost always you're talking as Robert Klein.
Yes, of course.
But that is astonishing. That was not true at the end of the 50s for comics. The guy talking about going to the doctor and his wife is not talking about going to the doctor and his wife.
No.
He's telling jokes.
The really thing, about Lenny is he had no champions. And Marty Garbus, who I still see, the First Amendment lawyer, I went to the opening of this, opera about the Jewish man was thrown overboard, all 1,000 Jews screaming at me in front of the Metropolitan Opera. It's a Palestinian opera of Robert Klein. I said, did you see it? It was one of the worst operas I've ever seen, and it was not a Palestinian opera. But anyway, Marty Garbus was his only champion. He couldn't work. No one wanted to hire him.
He took away his cabaret card.
Yeah, and then when George Carlin got busted in Milwaukee and got released immediately, that was the end of that. I mean, when George died, I had just come back from Johnny Carson's hometown. It was a whole comedy weekend. The great national comedy festival, and my phone is ringing off the hook. George died, Carlin. In the obituaries in the Times, there was a picture of him being arrested there, and he did not look happy. He would look terrified, these guys. But that was the end of this persecution. Unfortunately, it came too late for Bruce, not to mention this disgusting, tawdry photo of him at his toilet in L.A. with a needle in his arm,
George, when he was underage at a bar with Lenny Bruce, he talked about this all the time. You must know it. He was arrested with Lenny.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's really, really, really a great story. Lenny was arrested for obscenity. He was walking out to the paddy wagon, the police car, whatever it was, and George Carlin was underage in the bar and ran out and said, "I'm underage. I've been drinking." So he could ride to the police station.
Did not know
with Lenny Bruce.
Great story.
So, and I had, through Hal Wilner, who's a Saturday Night Live music guy, he had gotten all these Lenny Bruce tapes, like hundreds of hours, and he had edited them down, but not much. There was still like 30 hours left, and I sat and listened to them all. Kind of in the background doing other stuff. I didn't just really study them, but I had them down. And at one point, there was a 25-second thing where Lenny says, "Yeah, I was arrested in this club, and this schmuck, this kid, comes up just because he wants to talk to me and gets arrested, gets thrown to the back of some Irish fucking kid." He just says that, and I heard that, and I saw George and talked with him, and right before he died, I was preparing that little hunk, because I'd asked him, "Did you ever know that Lenny spoke about you?" And he said, "No." So I had that little hunk of George running in to get arrested and being referred to by Letty as a stupid schmuck.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
We had a great George Carlin day about 2 years ago when they wouldn't allow the local priest protested, or the whatever archbishop, regular bishop, I don't know, because George's bits about the church, because he went to Cardinal Hayes, which was right on the concourse, and they wanted to name a street where his Catholic elementary school was. They said, no way, the church. So we did it near Riverside Drive. There's a corner of 4 corners. It's George Carlin Way up on the Hudson there. And it was like a Van Gogh moment for the gathered, couple of hundred people. It was a lot of fun. He was what Rodney called a rounder. He quit school. He joined the Air Force, George. He was in show business when he was really young. Had disc jockey jobs in the South and all that. He was, kind of an autodidact, a bit like Groucho. He doesn't have much of an education, but because Groucho had a 6th grade education, but he knew a lot. He was smart. He was self-educated, and I guess he and Pryor. Pretty much the best I ever saw, I think, in person. I mean, Rodney in his own way. I mean, early Rodney at the Improv was unbelievable because he called it ad-libbing, but we Second City people, we called it improvisation, He was amazing, Do you remember David Fry, the impressionist? Sure. He had no personality of his own.
Right.
He had no David Fry. But he became LBJ. His face changed. Yeah. He was a little guy, and he was a bad drunk. And there was actually a block on his gas pedal on his Buick convertible. I swear, he was a short guy. So he's drunk in the back of the Improv, and Rodney's up there with a glass of wine, and going on and on, and he's yelling things out, and Rodney's getting pissed off. And he finally gets up and he starts to scream at Rodney, and Rodney goes, "Don't you raise your voices to me!" He was so quick, and yet when he did his 19-joke necklace that's what he called it, on Johnny Carson, this man had no discipline in his personal life with respect to drinking, drugs, smoking cigarettes. When it came to preparing for the Tonight Show, he would 2 months before, 3 months, start working on the jokes. He wrote them on a shirt cardboard, and when he had about 19 of them, that was a necklace for a good piece. And when he was through with it, he had nothing else prepared. That was his panel. And Johnny loved to tease him by asking him a question impromptu, and he'd go, and yet he was a great, great improviser in his day.
My first time meeting Rodney was we were playing the Celebrity Room at Bally's, and which is the room that Dean Martin played and Sinatra and everybody else. And we had these beautiful dressing rooms. You probably played the Celebrity Room there.
No, I didn't.
You're probably Caesar or something. We were playing huge, beautiful dressing rooms, and I walked toward my dressing room, and I'm walking by Teller's. And there's Rodney Dangerfield sitting on Teller's couch in a bathrobe.
Oh, that's who was famous for.
And slippers.
And testicles exposed, no
yes,
doubt.
and with a cup, with some young woman with him. And I looked in the dressing room and went, "Oh, hi, I'm Penn." And he went, "Hi, Penn." And I walk in, and Teller comes in a second later, and I go, "I didn't know you. How did you know Rodney Dangerfield?" And I don't. He goes, "I don't know him. I don't know him."
Wait a minute, Teller can't talk. Oh my God, you've crushed me, man.
He says, I don't know him. And it turned out that he was down on the casino floor, and a woman that he met wanted to meet Penn and Teller, and he said, "Come on, come back." And the guards, of course, let him back, and he walked into Teller's dressing room and then sat in there with her in his bathrobe until we left. We left him in Teller's dressing room. And then after that, he was lying about being friends with us, and then it was true. Every single thing we asked him after that, some stupid show we wanted him to do an appearance on, he would show up. He was wonderful, so kind to us, and I just loved that. He just decided, I'm friends with Penn and Teller, and just was.
He admired success, believe me. He used to do a bit when he was, I was there at the very beginning, just when he went from Jack Roy to Rodney Dangerfield. He told me that he was playing some shithole club, and he saw the name in the New York telephone directory. It is a kind of Anglo-Saxon name, Dangerfield, but he took the name. There's no respect, thing. He used to have a bit, says, I'll tell you, when do they let you in, When do they tell you you're finally a star? When do you get your little Filipino butler going with nice scrambled eggs, brings you your slippers? When do they, and they go, give me one of these, always the loser. And he pressed it hard, it seems to me, when he got successful. I remember my favorite airline. Do you remember MGM Grand Airlines?
Oh, sure.
With the private compartments.
Which was going to become Trump, right? Weren't they the same?
Oh, no. He took over Eastern Airlines.
Oh, that's right.
And immediately it bombed like everything else he touched, including the government. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, I took MGM once, yeah.
It was great. So I'm there with my kid was like 7 years old, so kind of sucking his thumb a little. And I hadn't seen him in a little while. And forget my kid, because we sit in the same compartment, and he's going on and on. He says, I'll tell you, did you hear about my thing with Warner Brothers, with Caddyshack 2? I said, yeah, I heard you walked away from $8 million. He said, no, 9. And finally he's talking, and my kid looks up with this. He goes, Daddy, remember you said you'd read to me alone? I said, you got to admit, he has good taste. Danger, I called him. You know what? He was amazing, because I would, the Yale Drama School, although I was offered a fellowship later by Robert Brustein to actually go up there twice a week and see if there's stand-up talent and also political cabaret. I left there in 63. This was about 65 or 6. No, it had to be years later, because Child of the 50s was 73, and his stepson played it for him, and he loved it. So anyway, there was no stand-up comedy. I certainly got tempered at Second City, which with Fred Willard was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But Dangerfield was my Yale drama school for, he saw me at the Improv as in a Broadway show. I lugged a tape recorder down 44th Street from the Shubert Theater to the Improv. And I do a set, and Alan Alda and Barbara Harris were the stars of my show. They came, gave me moral support, and I killed. It was good. 15 minutes, and this guy comes up to me, scratching his collar. I'll tell you, man, you were fucking brilliant, okay? But now you have to come here every night for 3 years. And he was right. I mean, I began going there and everything. And so I followed him around and learned the craft. Also, he wrote all his own material then. And he had stuff that was worthy of Art Buchwald. And, I'll tell you, our parks are unsafe, our streets are unsafe, our schools are unsafe. But under our arms, we have complete protection. That kind of stuff, just so clever, so symmetrical and all. So I really, there were about 11 intense years of late nights in Chinatown and gone out of town with him and being his friend. And he was also very heroic with respect to his 2 little children, because his wife was incapable of taking care of them. His first wife had problems, mental and alcohol problems, and he found her unconscious, and a 3- and a 5-year-old unsupervised. He said, I can't leave town. I'm going to open a club. Open a club. Every waiter in the delicatessens told him, what, are you crazy? Opening a club. He borrowed money from everyone, including me. I had $11,000 in the bank in 1968. He borrowed 5. He borrowed 120 from some bank. He got 30,000 from an aunt. He kept the wise guys at arm's length. They loved him. Rodney, anything you want. He said, no, I'm fine. And actually, there wasn't a penny of dirty money in it, and It made money. It's still open. It's a kind of dive, but he was amazing. Whatever, he had a business selling aluminum siding in 3 years after knocking on doors and canvassing. He had a certain kind of street smart and brilliance, but he was just never happy. He was never, ever happy except when he made people laugh.
Yeah.
And that's sad. And I found it overbearing, which is why I saw him less towards the end of his life.
Yeah.
What is the drowning story with you and Dangerfield?
Shall I tell it?
Penn's manager Glenn just lit up like a kid on Christmas.
It's actually a true story. I followed him to this gig at the Seacrest Hotel in Buzzards Bay, Cape Cod, the mecca of sailing, you know. And there was this hilarious, very feminine, fat guy, Steve, I forgot his last name, who owned the hotel. He was hilarious. So Rodney went up to the gig. He's not well known yet. I am totally unknown. I have some little gigs I'm starting. We get up there, and it's very windy. I mean, you know, 35-knot winds blowing. And, you know, nobody's sailboat is sailing. They're all docked. And people are in shelters. FEMA's giving out donuts. And Rodney Dangerfield goes, I'll tell you, man, let's take out a sailboat. So, Rodney, what do you know about sailing? What's there to know? It's a fucking wind. So he gives $20 to this boat boy from Boston. You know, he says, I don't know, Mr. Dangerfield. The boss might like it. You know, there's a 35-knot wind out. He says, no, come on, I got to give you a sailing lesson. And Rodney was like an impatient spaniel. You know, he hated to have to wait for things. And so the kid says, this is the mainsail, and this is the jib, and this is, he says, never mind that bullshit. Just give me the keys. What did the keys to a sailboat? The kid puts us on this catamaran, and he shoves us off, and I swear, in 5 seconds, we're 1,000 yards from shore. There's a wake behind us, like the Queen Mary going to water ski. And two Jews in a sailboat that don't know what they're doing. I mean, and there's a 4-foot chop, and the water is cold, 62, 63, and he's, you know, a 2-pack of Marlboros a day guy, and, you know, whatever. And he's in the front in ecstasy, like tugging at the collar that isn't there. There's too fucking much with the wind blowing, you know, it was. And suddenly, impulsively goes, I'll tell him, and I'm going to take a swim. And he jumps off. And I don't know what to do, the mainsail and the forecastle. I'm from the Bronxel. We're not sailing people. You know these shanties, you know, they say, he-ho-de ho, de shiver me timbers. In the Bronx, there's only yo. There's no ho-de ho. I didn't know what to do. I pushed the rudder all the way to one side and made a nice tight turn of 6 miles. Wondering what I'm going to tell the sheriff and the New York Post in succession when I go back alone, like an American tragedy. You know, were you jealous of Mr. Dangerfield's career? You went out together. I'm telling you, a hand comes out like Tales from the Crypt comics and grabs the pontoon of this sailboat, and his hand was blue. And I was a lifeguard years before, and you know, when a white person, remember in Long Beach, when a white person is close to drowning, there's a bluish tint. He was a few breaths from dying. He had given up pretty much, but even drowning, he sounded like Rodney Dangerfield. And he was vomiting water. And that is a true story. And he acknowledged it, too. I remember I was running in Broadway on Sisters Rosensweig. It was a wonderful play by Wendy Wasserstein. And Rodney came to visit his East Side apartment for one of the last times, and Joe Ansis was there. And I asked him if he would like to come to see my show. He says, nah, I don't like it. I can't have no patience for that shit. I said, hey, I saved your life. He said, you did. How much you want? I said, I don't know, $1 million? Oh, fuck, you remind me of that. You know who he did that with? He used to like to play mind games. Remember Joey Ross?
Oh, sure.
First he was on Bilko and then Car 54. The late Charlotte Ray, who I was on Broadway with and who just died. I did the thing for a box set of Car 54, which is a little disappointing. Bilko is a much better show. They were both, what's his name, a great producer. But Joey Ross was a kind of amoral Neanderthal. He lived in common law with hookers and he was filthy, and he was, after he became famous on Bilko, Charlotte told me he was impossible on Car 54. He was despised. Fred Gwynn was adored, and he was despised. But Rodney once told me these stories about talking to Joe Ross. He would say to Joe Ross, for example, I'll tell you, how much would you want to kill your sister? I mean, to have your sister. He goes, first of all, the fact that he begins to think about it, that already, it's going, he goes, look, 10,000, and he, without a smile, or, what would you do if you were on a desert island with a 13-year-old boy, and he would approach these things, screw up his face and think, I'd probably teach him how to, And, he was an incredible, Rodney was an incredible observer. He was always looking and looking and looking. But he was so obsessed with it. He had terrible parenting. His nephew Leonard is a retired dentist. We had a talk not long ago. I didn't even know the half of it. Some of the tough stuff in his childhood. Anyway, I do not believe that comedy necessarily has to come from pain and difficulty.
I know.
Jonathan, for sure. Jonathan's mother, he came back from the Marine Corps, World War II. Where's my airplanes? Where's my soldiers? Well, we gave them away. We didn't know if you were coming back. And that's true. But I'd like to think that's not true.
Yeah, I don't think it is. Kevin Pollak did a movie about comedy coming from pain. What was it called? Do you remember, Glenn? What the Kevin Pollak movie was? But he wanted to interview me, and I said, well, "Why are you interviewing me? I have no complaints. I had perfect parents who treated me great, and I had a good time. I just happen to like comedy, and I don't think it has to at all. There are counterexamples. There's Steve Martin.
Is it Misery Loves Comedy?
Misery Loves Comedy. Yeah.
Well, Martin is. He's not. He doesn't have the Jewish neurosis. Not Jewish to begin with. I don't know much about his upbringing, except Orange County or something like that. And
a little bit cold and distant and waspy, but not really tremendously troubled.
That is true.
Because when I grew up in Greenfield, Massachusetts, there's nothing I liked more than the Lenny Bruce records, and then after that, George Carlin and you and Pryor and so on. But all I wanted. Big, dumb, rural goy. All I wanted was to be from New York and be Jewish. I would just get the Village Voice and the East Village Other and read Abby Hoffman. And I just said, why? If I can't be at least Jewish and from New York, could I at least be gay? Something except a big, dumb farm boy. And then Lenny, whenever he would do these routines about the difference between, Jews and goys, would always, as far as I could tell, use me as an example of the worst thing possible. Western Massachusetts and rural and all that stuff. It was just. Did you ever see Lenny?
Well, no.
You never saw him?
No. I graduated college in '62. I left graduate school in '63. I first went to L.A., played the Troubadour in '67, and he died the year before.
Yeah.
But his friend, I went out with, the blonde woman, and she died, Maury. I don't know. Meanwhile, the Troubadour's still there, too, by the way.
I saw Mike Nesmith, the Monkees, there just last year.
I opened for Tim Buckley, also dead. How many people did I open or closed?
Now, did you ever have contact with Tiny Tim?
No.
No, never. I thought maybe your paths would have.
No, I did the Tonight Show with Johnny. When Johnny retired, they calculated, I guess, including about a dozen or 14, something like that, guest hosts, 90 times.
Yeah.
And he was good the day he left, but they were paying him $39 million, and the audience had begun to slip a little. The numbers, they could pay Leno $1 million something at least at the beginning, get the same audience. They didn't want an ugly thing where you have to fire Johnny Carson. But I remember I did a date in Atlantic City with Doc Severinsen, and he said Johnny was pretty rigid about big band instead of, he wanted to do, they had great musicians, he wanted to do jazz fusion and other stuff, and Johnny, big band. But I did, because I had a wonderful relationship with him. I guess his wives didn't until the last. He apparently had a lovely retirement. But I've been to his hometown twice, Norfolk, Nebraska. They don't have the balls to call it Norfolk, which is what it is. He gave a wing for the hospital for children. He built an auditorium. And, you know, he also came from his father was a white-collar worker for the electric company or something. And yet, you know, he had his own. I remember once in the old days, we used to smoke, you know, when we were sitting there. And on the show, especially in New York when it started, I grabbed from my coffee cup with water in it, and I took a big gulp. It was vodka. It was Johnny's, you know. And the Pall Mall used to burn from the bottom. So, I mean, you know, there's bad habits, I guess, that made him some sort of bad health at the end. But he was so generous. He really laughed you up. He knew if you did your homework and you came on that show, you know, wanting to do well. And believe me, it was nerve-wracking. In those days,
imagine.
There wasn't so much, you know, until I did the first HBO special, 75, there was no such thing as paid television.
Right.
You know, HBO showed movies, and then I forgot the guy who used to rent those movies from the studios. They paid a fortune for a blockbuster 3 months, 2 months after it was in the theaters, uncut, all that. Some guy on the West Side invented, so why not take a kid like Klein who's doing all these college concerts and you know, let him say what he wants and do it for an hour. So, I mean, I did...
yeah, well, I really, because that HBO comedy special, which kind of does everything for comedy in the 80s and starts with you, what was that first meeting like? We're going to do an HBO comedy special. How did you? Because everybody just follows that template. Where did the template come from? How did you do that?
Well, first of all, we had the wrong director, and yet he became one of their stars. I can't remember his name. His experience was
good enough for him.
Directing hockey games, the Boston Bruins. Yeah. So when we told him that I'm going to be prancing back and forth like a caged tiger, that's my style on the stage, to occupy the stage, it has almost no close-ups. But the way it happened was, I was really hot then, you know. A Child of the 50s had come out, the first album. Of course, I lost it, as I did each time, the Grammy to George Carlin's albums, which was a great AM, FM, all those great.
Well, fuck him, you're still alive.
Yeah, I know. He was a sweetheart. He was frail as anything last time I saw him. I keep in touch with his daughter, and I'm very much a good friend of Rodney's daughter, Melanie, who's a sweet person.
I used to talk to George on the phone all the time.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'd bump into each other. I once told him I liked Nolan Strong and the Diablos. 4 days later, there was a complete audio cassette thing of Nolan Strong.
Oh, that's great.
How sweet that was. But anyway, I didn't think of it as such a big thing. What is it exactly? HBO? No, they didn't call it HBO. They called it Home Box Office.
Right, exactly.
They had about 20 employees in Time Life building. They were owned by Time Life. And they had 400,000 subscribers in eastern Pennsylvania, Long Island, and Manhattan. Mm-hmm. That was basically it. And so
you're a very good choice for that.
Well, I was hot, you know, young comedian. We're going to go this way, and it was New Year's Eve at Haverford College in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And the reason why it was there, because they sent an art director around to 4 or 5 colleges I was booked in, and this had gorgeous little wooden auditorium with busts of geezers who invented the university, and it looked so collegiate. And that's how it started. And also, we began the thing of having something backstage before I go on. You know, I was primping in a little bit of that backstage, and then the next one we did at NYU, and I think the third and so forth. I did one at Yale. I did them all over the place. And I did 9 of them. I'm not going to do any more, but I also did 2 other shows for them, a 50s revival show with Chuck Berry, reneging in the lobby. I'm not going out till there's cash, motherfucker. Right. And he was You allowed to say that on your show? He's done. I saw him do that twice at the Claridge in
I
Atlantic
believe he
City.
did it every single time.
You know, well, tell us beforehand. You know what I mean? The HBO and the Beacon Theater let him go. That was the 50s show. I was the MC. But at the Claridge, they arranged it, and he didn't show up for our show at Valley Forge. He was opening, I was closing. We were splitting the bill. There's 2 shows, 7 and 10, and there's no Chuck Berry.
So you went out and played guitar. You could
Well,
play.
the owner said, could I, do a longer show? I said, fine. You got to tell people Barry isn't here, and whoever wants to leave can leave.
And bring me cash, motherfucker.
Or I don't go on.
So, my ego prevents me from telling you the entire theater left when they found it. A few people, but not many. A couple of dozen people left. They, whatever, he's not here. So I'm doing him. Maybelline, why don't you show up? Maybelline. So we're approaching the 10 o'clock show, and I assume, ditto, I'm going to do the longer show. And I also said, I want more money. I don't need cash, but if I'm doing a longer show and I'm the only one.
So, amazing you thought of that. I don't think anyone else in show business
You ever
would have
work
thought of
those Westburys and those theaters and around? Yeah.
that. We can't work the round because we have shit hidden behind us.
Oh, right. You do? I don't
Yeah. We have hidden shit.
No. The thing is, I love that stage it turns because it's a question of physics. If you counter it at exactly the pace it's turning, you won't grow older. I feel like a circus horse when I play those places. So anyway, he shows up 10 to 10. By the way, they hired 4 musicians too.
Sure.
So
which you would never meet with, no idea.
And he's furious. Nobody told me that. There's 2 shows. They had a special guy, William Morris, that handled him. I mean, devoted to him.
Sure.
And he's furious. And the owner says, "There's no way." The manager, and these big galoots who couldn't make it in the NFL, former linemen, this work in security, very big boys, they surround him. And they said, "I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave," And I should have kept my mouth shut. I said, "Well, Chuck, even if you thought there was only at 10 o'clock, I mean, you showed up at like 8 minutes to 10. He said, 'You're not my father.' And I said, 'Indeed, I'm not.' 'No, I think mother.' He said, 'You're not my mother.' Now, this guy was extremely impressive. He was years ago when my first album, the Buddha Records promotional woman was his friend, and we went around in his caddy. She introduced me to him. "This is Robert Klein. He's a wonderful new comedian." He goes, "Far out." I think I put that in some bit. But he was wiry, and he did 2 terms in the big house.
Yeah, in 6'3".
So anyway, the end of the story is I'm doing the show, the second one. He's out of the building, and I'm comfortable. And I started, "Maybelline, why don't you show up?" And who shows up? Chuck Berry. Only I can see it because the last row or 2 of the auditorium are empty. And the theater in the round, and he's coming down the aisle, and these galoots are silently heading him off, and I'm making fun of him, and he's coming towards me, That was comedy at its best. It was
edgy.
Like that dangerous time working for the U.S.O. when we flew into Orlando and took fire from the Pirates of the Caribbean. He was very intimidating is the word, like in a criminal, evil way. He was a wonderful rock and roller, but every time I saw him in the last 25 years of his life or 30, he was mailing it in.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Beach Boys, his guitar was out of tune, and
Oh, yeah, well, there's in the movie Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, they interview people who played in his band, and one of them was Springsteen.
Is that so?
He was hired at like 18 years old, and he thought he would get somebody to tell him something. And no one he didn't even see Chuck Berry till he walked out on stage. And the whole band is yelling out what key they're in. He just assumed you'd know every song and how to play it. And Springsteen described it as the most terrifying time of his life.
He was a little undisciplined. Interesting, that woman was an educated woman. And his paramour, a white former teacher or even assistant professor somewhere. Very interesting. She called him Charles. And, they behave differently when you call Charles and Chuck.
Sure.
And Chuck Berry.
But
Unless you're Chuck
go.
Schumer. It's outrageous. We need a little oratory on our side. Really. When what's his name? When Kavanaugh said to Klobuchar, she said, "Did you ever black out drinking?" He said, "I don't know, Senator. Did you?" She should have said, "How dare you? I am a senator of the United States. You're applying for," and said she went, "I don't have a drinking problem, Senator," and that's it. Passive woman,
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
So, have you ever blacked out drunk?
Yes. I can't remember, but yes. Now, Rodney had a line. He said, "I'll tell you, when I drink too much, I got to go find my car, and I got to bring back the car I took. I have to find the guy that does weaving." I have to find a guy that does weaving. Bud Friedman would give him a bottle of pomade. Was his favorite. Was a French wine. And
Is that a hair product?
Huh?
Is that a hair product, pomade?
It is a kind of hair. Maybe I'm pronouncing it incorrectly because he did. That was Michael Dukakis' wife, Kitty, who drank hair tonic.
Yeah, okay.
They're mixing them up. Yeah. Rodney Dangerfield. That's the one thing he didn't drink, hair tonic. It's interesting. He would not smoke pot. This guy was smoking pot in 1940. He told me a story. He would go to his connection near Times Square to get a little pot, and there's a knock at the door. The guy goes, "Who is it? The great one." It was Gleason coming to buy some pot. That's around the time he was in that All Through the Night with Humphrey Bogart. He did a few Warner Brothers films, and then he did Life of Riley, but it didn't work out. What's his name did it? The one who played the Babe Ruth story. William, who played Babe Ruth in that awful movie?
Oh.
Babe, they'll never strike you out. Bullshit, I'm lying here, dying of cancer. Remember this? They were hurling baseball cliches. "You're Babe Ruth, they'll never strike you out." "Babe, the serum, maybe like a pinch hitter, William Bendix. So anyway, Rodney he never smoked pot before he worked. He might drink 9 martinis and slur, but he would not smoke pot.
Did he have a reason for that?
Yes, this guy was smoking forever, but it somehow was not his. When he was writing material, that's another story. Mm-hmm. But when he was performing, I first started smoking pot like in graduate school. My friends went to City College in New York. I was terrified they're going to be drug addicts. But I learned my lesson early. We were doing Romeo and Juliet in your home area there in Holyoke, right where the amusement park was. Mm-hmm. It was called Casino in the Park. And we're doing Romeo and Juliet, and I'm playing Benvolio, a kind of useless cousin of Romeo. But I was with great actors, real pros and everything. And I smoked with my friends earlier in the day, and the performance was 8 o'clock at night. And we're in repertory, so we don't have a lot of rehearsal and memorize lines. And I was terrified because I hadn't come down completely, and I never, ever would have any pot within hours of a theatrical performance. But, I think cannabis, they're finding all these things about it. Mm-hmm. I never heard of, but there ought to be more research done that it's become more and more popular. We know that it's not as harmful as alcohol, mm-hmm. and all that. And I always
just saying very little. Alcohol's health benefits, not a long list.
Not a long list. No, that's true. They say the tannins in red wine, right? Tannin this. I don't know what they're talking about.
Have you noticed the difference in your audiences? People, now that it's legal here in Nevada?
No, my audience is a little older. in many of the shows, your younger people show up. I'm a big discovery. No, I haven't. You know what was a big enemy of mine, though? Quaaludes, when those were big. The audience was completely stupefied. The pills, there's no ritual to pills. Also, the smoking part is, even the pot is annoying, you know. But, I mean, I find, even if it's... Well, I remember when I worked with the Modern Jazz Quartet at the Village Gate.
Wow.
They were the royalty, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And wonderful people, top plan. And Percy Heath was the bass player.
Sure.
And he's drinking a little peach brandy, and I said, gee, Percy, how come you, I thought, gee, alcohol is so... outmoded. I said, you don't like a little pot? He said, no, before performing, I just like a little peach brandy. Would you share some with me? And so forth. And almost everyone did something. I don't think Steve Martin or Seinfeld were much into any kind of stimulants. And some people went overboard. Hey, man, Tonight Show, the Saturday Night Live, I hosted the first year, fifth show. There was a line of Coke from one end of the desk to the other. And Garrett brought the pot, a big bag of it, And 30 Rock.
So that's why he was on the show. That's always been a mystery to me. Now we got it, yeah.
Well, the hard of hearing thing, he's the only one that really did not have much of a career after it. Yeah. He was certainly a lovely guy. But it was interesting. Some people went through the cracks. Lorraine Newman almost did. A doll of a woman, really, and she's fine now. Belushi was the sweetest kid. He came from a middle-class thing. And by the time it was too late, nobody could tell him to stop. Yeah. When they were making Blues Brothers, maybe if that director who was...
Landis.
Yeah, who was responsible for the death of those children. I work with kids. I was the biggest stunt movie ever, Hooper. Mm-hmm. And whenever I did a movie with children, they were scrupulous about it. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, the little boy in Close Encounters, I did a movie with him and Michael J. Fox. The kid was 13 by this time, and his mother was telling me when he was doing the thing, he was a little baby, he was napping, and they had a big shot ready for Spielberg was ready, and they came and said, Mr. Spielberg is ready now for the shot. She said, oh, well, I can't wake my little boy sleeping. What? No, we've been setting up this shot all day. They told Spielberg, he said, we'll do it tomorrow. That is being ethical instead of having kids at 2 a.m. when they shouldn't be working. And while these explosives do not, they're not like conventional explosives, they're extremely dangerous. In this case, it dislodged the helicopter's tail rotor and, the tragedy. But anyway, Belushi...
Hooper. Go ahead.
I want to go to Hooper.
I want to go to SNL, but he's the host of the show.
But you can finish. Why don't he finish his stories? It was his.
It was my first hush puppy. We were in Alabama. I thought he was a great guy, Burt Reynolds. I don't know how he wound up to be a joke with that blonde and everything.
Yeah.
I didn't follow, but he in fact...
Did you find him to be a good actor?
He was a good movie star. Yeah, he could be a good actor, too. But he was a really good movie star in that he knew what he projected, and he was incredibly charming. And I remember I was married then, and Sally Field was telling my wife what a gentleman he was with her children and how tactfully they didn't sleep together in her house with the children and blah, blah, blah. And he was really a charming guy. He had a small, intimate birthday party once, and Orson Welles was there.
Every small, intimate party has Orson Welles.
350, at least 350. Yeah. Card tricks, and ate a cucumber slice. When he got home, there had to be 3 open bottles of boxes of Malamars ready, because that girth. By the way, I'm startled with how svelte Penn is, and
it's impressive.
How the hell do you do it?
I eat whole plants now. I'm one of those vegan nuts, so I just eat vegetables.
Yeah, I found calorie counting is cool. Now, do you drink alcohol?
Never had a sip in my life.
No
or any
kidding.
Recreational drug. Nothing.
No kidding.
I'm just one of those very odd people.
That's you like control.
Maybe. Maybe a little bit, yeah. I was, when you were talking about doing Romeo and Juliet and having the pot, when I was in San Francisco doing our show there, Bateller, in the late '70s, I very badly injured my hand, and I got a bad burn, and I had never missed a show, and we were going to go on. I'd gone to the emergency room, and they'd bandaged it up, and I was going to be juggling with this burned hand and do all sorts of stuff. So they gave me, I guess it was some form of Percodan, and I'd never been high before, in any way. I mean, not medicinally, not recreationally, nothing. I was, whatever I was then, I was probably 28 years old, 27 years old. And they gave me these drugs to stop the hand. And I had this 15-minute monologue in the middle of the show. And I remember I was going to change off with Teller, and I went backstage, and he was going on stage alone. And while I was on stage, I realized that I was better than I ever thought I was. I was much better at monologues than I had thought I was, and there was other stuff I needed to say when I was on stage there, and I was killing. I was doing great, and I went backstage, and Teller went on, and the stage manager backstage said, "I think you need to keep to the script." And I said, "No, I'm doing great." And he said, "You're not."
Did you leave out words?
And I'd ended up doing a half hour, my 15-minute monologue, and some of it incomprehensible. And I remember this huge embarrassment coming over me of, I was out there high. I was doing stuff high. And if I hadn't been afraid of drugs before that, I certainly was after.
Yeah, well, those are, that's the Purdue company, not chickens, but pharmaceutical. They would have been better off manufacturing chickens. They're taking these page ads in the New York Times every day. We make opioids, and we want you to. They're the biggest bums, these people, and since they had to know that it was much more addictive than they were saying, and they had to know that the orders for it pouring in from everywhere were not. There weren't that many people who needed this for pain. There was a very interesting documentary recently. They're spreading this to like Myanmar, where the representatives from the opioid company go there and of convincing the medical authorities that they should buy ample supplies of this at $50 a dose. Meanwhile, they show these cancer patients suffering in these substandard hospitals in Myanmar a $3 shot of morphine. These are people who really need pain relief. A $3 shot of morphine would be even more effective, less addictive, but it has the stigma of illegality. Yeah. So what happened is that the pain management community is suffering because everyone's pulling back. You look suspicious if you're prescribing this, because they were prescribing it for everything, and you see how powerful that was. Oh, yeah. That's interesting about you, your generation, and into, well, maybe, did you learn anything from Lenny Bruce's ruination? Did that have anything to do with you not taking drugs?
I believe that was 100% of it, because I was crazy for Lenny Bruce, crazy for Hendrix, loved all this stuff, and they just started dying, and I just had this. I forgive me if this is self-absorbed, but I just thought people with my personality don't seem to do well with drugs. I have never ever respected moderation. I do everything completely all the way, one way or the other. It's either zero or everything. And I just thought, boy, I just think I could be dead before I'm 30 if I even have a sip of alcohol. And I realize that's not true. And I realize that all the studies say that the vast majority of people handle recreational drugs wonderfully. I just didn't think I would. Now, that's what I think is true. But the fact of the matter is that my family are generations of teetotalers back all the way. This very puritanical, and they say that your parents are the big influence on that. So maybe the fact that I never saw anybody drink. It never came up. It was never talked about. It wasn't even like, I know people that had parents that were alcoholics and were teetotalers because of that. My dad never had a sip. You know, it went back generations. It was just, we don't do that. And they never even talked to me about it. They never even told me not to do drugs. It was just never even considered. So maybe that's part of it. I think it's very complicated how we make these decisions in our life. You know, when I watched the documentary about you, and which I really liked a lot.
It's on Stars. You know, I think they have another few months window. I hope something nice happens, because unfortunately it's the Weinstein Company. I did 2 pictures for him. He never laid a hand on me. This son of a- It's only he said, she said, she said, she said, she said, she said, she said. Daily News stole that from me. I was doing it for a long time about Cosby, and they put it on the cover.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
She said, she said. I was doing it publicly for a long time. Anyway.
Daily News, you're on notice.
You talked of there's a lot in the documentary about your very early life and a lot post Yale. But how did you get from childhood to Yale to all show business like that?
Went to college to be a doctor. A few things got in my way. Calculus, physics. Sophomore year, switched to history of political science, but went out for the school plays at Alfred University, a small liberal arts college in Western New York. That was a great prep school for doctors and dentists. It's also a famous ceramic school there, ceramic design and ceramic engineering. And I participated in the plays, and there was a tasty duo, Smith and Brown, 2 professors. They were the drama department, and my first role was the young brother in Brothers Karamazov. And I did every play, and I was good. And end of junior year, these 2 pipe-smoking Tweety, they cornered my father. And they said, he's very talented, Mr. Klein, and we can get him into Yale School of Drama. And my father said, Yale? Really? I mean, yeah, did Al Jolson go to Yale to be an actor? Did Eddie Cantor? And, you know, he had a point. Doree Smith, the head of the department, his old roommate at Amherst was the dean of the Yale School of Drama. I didn't have to audition. He had only recommended 3 people in 25 years. And I got in without an audition. And I was immersed in theater. My best friend Jimmy Burrows is the biggest director in California. I'm going tomorrow to do another episode of Will and Grace. He directs all of them. John Guare, the great American playwright, was in my class at that time. It wasn't great. I was immersed in it. But then I left. I did summer stock in your old area in Western Massachusetts, and I was bereft in the fall of '63. For the first time in my life, I'm 21 years old. I'm out of school. President Kennedy is assassinated. My father calls from work. Turn on the TV. He won't, So it was just desolate. And then I began substitute teaching to get out of my parents' apartment. I mean, I'd been away for 5 years. And the break was Jimmy Burrows was doing a little review in New Haven. He stayed for the 3-year Master of Fine Arts degree. And I did a little musical review, and a guy from William Morris came up, saw me, said, Second City's coming to town looking for actors for Chicago. And I'm in the Second City conference room with 20 other actors who want the job, including a guy I never met named Fred Willard. And Fred and I did improvs together, and everyone laughed, and we got the job. And I can't wait to see him this week. He lost his wife a few weeks ago.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mary, yeah. I mean, it's really sad. And it's 53 years ago, this past April, that Willard and I reported for work in Chicago. Steinberg was already there, David Steinberg, who was as good an improviser on that stage as I ever saw. That was the real thing. Got 150 a week. You practiced regular acting because you had set pieces, sketches, and honed our improvisational skills, taking things from the audience, and I love to do musical improvisations. And then, I got my first Broadway show I auditioned for. I was in Chicago for a year. We had a little...
Did you just say you got your first Broadway show you auditioned for?
I did.
Fuck you! you. Fuck you in the neck. There's a lot of people screaming at you right now. Don't ever say that sentence again. Never say that sentence again to anybody.
It was Appletree, Bach and Harnick, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof, and Mike Nichols was a director. When we sort of had our pedigree in common, he had been at what became Second City a few years earlier. I made him laugh, and then I went with tape recorder after the show opened. It was going to be a hit. I bought a Volvo, which lasted about 4 seconds with the potholes in New York, and went down the Improv where I met Rodney. And William Morris, I was getting $175 a week on Broadway. They were getting $17.50 a week. And I told them, hey, I'm doing stand-up. And we'll come down. 2 months, they're not coming down. So Rodney says, fuck them, you know what I mean? You need a manager. You know? My Rodney is very bad today. Usually do it better. Right? Jack Rollins and Charlie Jaffe were managing Woody Allen, Dick Cavett, Joan Rivers. He had been the manager for Nichols and May, Harry Belafonte. He was a classy, the best thing that happened. Rodney told him about me and made a date for him to see me at the Improv. But the night before, Rodney couldn't resist. He was driving with Rodney was nerve-wracking.
Oh, my God.
Had a Chevy convertible.
I can't even. I never.
He just said driving with Rodney. We both just felt like we got hit with something.
One hand, and he has to pay attention all the time to you when you're. I'm doing this on radio. I'm turning my head to the right.
They can hear.
One hand on the wheel, and no, me, man. And the other thing, and it's saying, "Do you know what I mean, man?" You go, "I'll tell you. He may come. No, me, man. No, me, man." You know, it's like he contracted it. He insisted on going to the Carnegie Deli to show me to Jack before the next night when before we go in there. It was like the beginning of Woody's film.
Sure.
All the managers. He's in that film, Jack. He's sitting there. And he goes, Jack, I'll tell you, Jack, here's Robert Klein. You're going to see him tomorrow night. He's eating a pastrami sandwich, and he looks up and he goes, a good face for motion pictures. And he comes the next night, and it was one of the great nights of my life. Everyone in the Improv knew the importance of it for me. One of the heads of William Morris came with the entire Merv Griffin crew and everything. Finally, when they heard that Jack Rollins is coming, and Jack was late, and Rodney said, just hold on. Don't, the guy from William Morris, I got to get the last train to Great Neck, hold on for Jack. And, he didn't let me pay a check for 2 years. He didn't take commission for 2 years. He was the greatest for a young comedian. And I want to tell you, the same office produced within 3 years of me, Robin, Billy Crystal, and David Letterman. Not a bad haul, huh?
Not a bad haul.
That was Robin was a shock. They just did a film about him. It doesn't do him justice. But I guess it's just the overwhelming thing of depression.
Well, yeah. There's a lot of stuff about that it might also be that he did have a terminal illness.
Yes, it had quite a ways to go, I would think. But even Rick Overton, one of his good friends and a good friend of mine, he said after that heart operation, he got depressed too. Mm-hmm. People do, your life changes. I got to say, I knew him for a very, very long time, and he was really a very nice star. He was a lovely man.
Well, the thing I always say about Robin is we were on Saturday Night Live, and I brought my mom and dad. My mom and dad were very old when I was born. My mom was 45 when I was born, so they were elderly, and I got a limo for them and brought them down from Massachusetts to see me on Saturday Night Live, and they were treated wonderfully. But the big thing was Robin was the biggest star in comedy then. Mm-hmm. And he went into the dressing room where my parents were and did like 15 minutes for him, with the manic Robin style. What's it like to have your son be a magician, and just the standard stuff you'd imagine doing. And it just meant the world to me.
He's very kind that way.
I remember talking to my dad afterwards, and my dad telling his friends, we went down to Saturday Night Live. Robin Williams talked to us for a long time. What a night. And I said, Dad, and your son was on Saturday Night Live? That has to be part of the story somewhere. You didn't just go to New York and meet Robin Williams. There was something else happening, Dad. Like, that's why the limo was there? But that's how wonderful.
My father used to do that too. I said, so he said, boy, how'd they get away with so? After the Tonight Show, I'd call home and, boy, how'd they get away with so few stars? Pop, how did I do? You that guy that was Pop. You were good. My father said, where did you go to school?
I didn't.
You're one of these guys too. Huh?
I'm one of these.
You went to high school?
Kinda.
Really?
Yeah.
From that,
I went. I graduated.
How did you manage
to
do that in a nice home like that? How could they possibly let you?
It was one of the heartbreak of my life is that I let my parents down so much. I had scholarships and stuff, but I wanted to go right into show business.
Were you already doing magic then?
I was already doing juggling, which is even worse than magic.
You told your parents you didn't want to be a doctor, that you wanted to be an actor. How did that go?
Well, after Dad removed his head from the Zion XB gas chamber, he was nervous.
Because you rolled right over that. You're like, yeah, I was trying to be a doctor, and then I was like, oh, I'll go here.
He was very nervous about it, but you know what? They're both long gone now, but they sat on the White House lawn while Lucy and Marvin Hamlish and I performed for President Carter in the Supreme Court and the Congress, and he came on the set when I did a movie with Barbra Streisand. He came to my Broadway open, and they had a wonderful
it was a long time.
And I helped support them at the end because my father knew nothing about money, nor did I, and I'm very fortunate my money wasn't stolen.
Yeah.
I went to see Al Pacino in Merchant of Venice.
I saw it. Yeah.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
I played that in college, by the way. If not for Jew eyes, and before an entirely anti-Semite audience. If not for Jew eyes, no. If not for Jew hands, organs, senses, dimensions, affections, passions, no, Jew boy. Have we not eyes? Do we not bleed if you prick? No, that was my. But anyway, he said he had been taken big time, and Jane Alexander, who I was on Broadway with, she and her husband were left with 2 cars and a house by an unscrupulous accountant who was in Rikers Island refusing to talk. So can he spend 4 or 5 years away and then come back and have this stolen money? It seems somehow immoral. Anyway,
so you're actually saying that there are people in show business who've had their money stolen from them?
Yeah.
That's new information.
Yeah. I know that Bacon and Kira Sedgwick got taken by the Madoff guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see there was a journalist that went to see him in jail, and they said he was absolutely obsessed to get change from the reporter, to use the vending machine to get a little tin of tuna with crackers, that he was obsessed with it. And then some of the former guys who were already out talked about it. Oh, yeah, Barney gave us good advice, man. He told her, Apparently he's a clubhouse lawyer. And it's a true sociopath. Because these were people...
Well, the Mets...
Is that the subway?
Yeah, I think it's a train.
Oh, you got a choo-choo train here.
Yeah, we got a brand new choo-choo train here in Vegas.
It's not surprising. You always had a ponytail. You're a big guy with your suit and your vest, and distinctive. When you say you push it to the limit, you probably did it with food, right?
Yeah, and it went the other way, just as crazy the other way.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I guess that was a lesson, too. That painkiller that whacked you out a little and made you, as a perfectionist, less than perfect in what you were doing that night in your craft.
I didn't like it.
Plus that thing that you said. You're the kind of guy you think could go over the... Trump is like that. He saw his brother. I mean, God forbid he starts drinking. I hope it stays.
Did you hear what Robert Klein just said? You're just like Trump.
Yeah. Well,
no,
he'll be beaten. Call the guys. He's break an arm.
Get him off the train.
He saw his brother deteriorate. He actually lost his brother quite young.
Yeah.
And see those pictures of his father, man, it's like a caricature. But he never touched anything.
Right. I know we sadly bonded over that when I was on when I did my 2 tours of duty on Celebrity Apprentice.
Oh, see, the problem with me is I didn't realize how important that was because I never watched it. I saw seconds at a time him saying you're fired, and Joan Rivers' daughter cursing and being let out of the room. So I never. They wanted me to do something on it, but not be an apprentice. But they wanted me, and I didn't want anything to do with it because. He did one great thing, and that was the skating rink in New York. Mm-hmm. The skating rink in the South End is a gem. And for my little apartment, I live mostly in the lower Hudson Valley, but I could see it, when the foliage is bare. And they were monkeying around 5 years. It wouldn't be fixed. He said, let me fix it, and I put my name, and he fixed it. That's it. He built a golf club a mile and a half from my house, and I got a call 14 years ago. Donald would like you to come to the opening and the thing. I said, all right. I knew him from New York. I'd been to his apartment for a Democrat fundraiser in the lobby in Trump Tower, his foyer there.
And you underline the word Democrat because no one knows you're a Democrat. Is that right?
No, no, he was a Democrat.
I was just joking.
But the other thing is, there's 2 things. Number one, I get a call 3 years ago. Donald Trump canceled on them. Would you be mayor of New York in Sharknado 2? I said, all right.
We were in Sharknado 2, right? Or 3?
They already did. There's a new one 4 now.
Well, we were in one of them.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, we were.
I was in 2 and 3. I was the mayor of New York.
I believe we're in the same movie together then.
Then I heard he was pissed off in 3 because they gave the part of the president to Mark Cuban. This is before he ran. But anyway, he canceled and I became president. The other thing is...
Why can't that happen again? Why can't he cancel and you become president? Can we do that? Can we do that in the real world?
I don't feel I don't think I'm equipped to be president.
Now? Still?
The bar is quite low, but it's, limbo. The bar is around about 8 inches off the floor now. I did a gig at Mar-a-Lago about 12 years ago, like a business group. It happens to be Mar-a-Lago. I didn't expect to see Donald. So there's Donald and a Maybach. I'd never seen that car before. The Mercedes on steroids. I said, Donald, I'm doing this show here. Would you like to introduce me? He said, I'd love to. So we told him what we tell everybody, Murphy's Law, do not introduce me till I'm in the wings. Because once I was at a urinal at Iowa State University, Robert Klein, and I almost cut my penis off. They zipped it too quickly. Quick zip. So he said, oh, no problem. So I have a cottage they gave me, and I'm going towards the venue, and I hear Robert Klein and Donald, and the applause comes and then dies down, and there's buzzing, like, is he dead? Where is he? So all I could say was, you're fired. He couldn't even do that. But I saw him at, there was an opening at Radio City Music Hall, and I told the Madison Square Garden people I go, and I saw him, and he was already, he hadn't declared for president, but he was already talking about the president's birth certificate. Right then and there. All those New York people who enabled him, as Frank Rich wrote, including Democrats, should have turned their back on him because he looked my way and I just looked the other way. I don't think it made his day one way or the other. But Harvey Weinstein was there and he said, hello, Robert. And there were very pretty Italian models there. And the next day, apparently that was the night he hooked up, and the next day he had invited her to his hotel, and that's where that embarrassing thing in the hallway happened. Yep. He tried to get her in. Mm-hmm. She went right, she's an Italian woman, she went right to the cops. And the cops, while she's at the police, he calls her again. And they say, keep him on the phone, And she made a date with him, and they wired her. The wire didn't work. Her phone worked. And that's how he got the charge of assault.
Oh, she was recording on her phone?
And I was there for history. How proud.
I was say, you were like ground zero for like a wave of awful.
Yes.
all the bad starts with Robert Klein.
Then Bill Cosby offered me a drink, and then who else is at this?
You know what? Janice Dickinson, I used to go with her sister Debbie years ago, and she told me that 35 years ago.
Yeah.
But she didn't say he raped her. She said she escaped. But she was fudging it to me, too, because of the embarrassment.
Sure.
See, if men could only understand how it feels, the violation, the embarrassment. You don't just go running. Never mind if it's Bill Cosby or a date rape. You just don't want it in your life, you know. Well, why weren't this Chuck Grassley? These guys have to be put out to pasture in all the parties. Feinstein, Grassley, what's his name from Idaho, all these guys. I mean, just Leahy from Vermont. Yeah. They've been there forever, and the founding fathers, they conceived of, but certainly the Jeffersonian ideas. The gentleman farmer does this civic duty for a few years and then goes back to something else. On the other hand, there is some argument for the several Senate terms because the government is so complicated. You have to teach someone the ropes every 2 seconds. But some of these people are there forever. And the seniority, the brilliance of the idea of 2 senators, no matter how small the population is, but a larger number of representatives where there's more population is great. Except now, about 35% of the population is really running the country because of seniority and all that. I tell you, it's a tenuous experiment, this democracy. I've been hung up on the Revolutionary War lately, a lot of books. And Adams, to me, is a bigger hero than he was a cranky son of a bitch, and
very cranky.
And I'm reading about Franklin in Paris, and this serious business of trying to get money out of the French and to have a country. And I hope we don't screw it up. I mean, it's not forever. It's not guaranteed.
No, it's not guaranteed at all. Yeah. And this is, I mean, I think about, and of course, I think about my dad having to go from 68 to 72, with a president who was insane, and National Guard shooting students, and bomb threat or a bomb going off every week. I try to hold on to the fact that we got through that.
60s, you mean?
68 to 72, right around there.
Oh, that's when Richard Pryor disappeared. He used to be, and he came back a different Richard Pryor professionally. He was so adorable in those old days on the Merv Griffin on the afternoon. Woody and his second wife, Mary Hartman, what's her name?
Louise
Lasser. Yeah. They used to be on together, but Pryor would wear these collegiate sweaters. He was adorable, totally clean, and of course, just you wanted to kiss him and hug him. So I met him at the Improv, and he was I hadn't been on television yet, and we would talk, and I said, "What college did you go to?" And he almost fell off the chair laughing, but he was like that. He was brought up in a brothel, basically. He was very sweet, too. I saw him smack a girl in front of the Improv. I wrote about it in my book. And I was so, he smacked his girlfriend, and she had a little blood in her lip. And the next day, everything was good, and he apologized to me. And I said, "Hey, man," he was actually a sweetheart. And George and I wish I had this picture. It was a comedy awards, and he was helpless, Pryor, in a wheelchair. Couldn't speak.
Yeah.
He's got a Latina woman pushing the stuff from his lips, and his wife. And he had said in an interview in the New York Times Magazine in Hawaii, smoking his Marlboros in his wheelchair, that he hinted that he would never let it get too far, this multiple sclerosis. You know what I mean? Like he'd end it somehow or whatever. That was the inference. And there wasn't. He was a nightmare. Couldn't move. Couldn't talk.
I know.
So I whispered in his ear, "Love you. You're among the very best I ever saw." And blah blah blah. And we take a picture, and then George and I walk away. And I was like, George is, I was going, and George goes, "That dude is fucked up." He didn't mean it, in a mean way, but I told that to Seinfeld on his getting coffee thing. I mean, oh my God. That's just very sad. And of course, the older, I'm 76, I work out. I try to take decent care of myself, and working is great too. I mean, I don't have the kind of schedule I used to, and I don't want it. But I mean,
How often do you do stand up?
Oh, I don't know, 35 dates a year maybe now. I can do it in my sleep, man. I love these medium-sized theaters.
And you still love doing it?
I really do. When I'm on stage, I don't like getting up out of my beautiful, my comfortable house in the Hudson River Valley. I have a long road trip for me, a little over 2 weeks, because I'm going to do Will and Grace as well. But I do. After I feel satisfied, the work is done. But it's not constant anymore, which I like. I love, that's the good part of being old. One of the very, especially when I'm comfortable, and I'm very thankful for that. Again, for 3 different accountants who didn't steal my money. Who properly invested it, and I have a pension. Every movie I did, I mean, believe it or not, I've been in 40 feature films, and all the television shows, the hundreds of stuff, and the 6 Broadway shows. They used to take money out, for pensions and all that. What the hell are they doing, And now it's great. And I performed at the Actors Home, man, in New Jersey, and it was really wild because they were actually a pretty good audience. There's some dementia in some of them and a lot of wheelchairs. It only has 140 people, but I feel a kind of, first of all, I don't want to wind up there, all right? Indigent actors and writers and performers wind up there, and it's a beautiful facility. But Lucy Onez and I are doing a one-night benefit of their playing our song. It's the 40th anniversary of that musical we did. And we're going to read from the book, but sing all the songs and everything. Everybody always wants to see that show. And it's 40 years since, I wouldn't want to do theater anymore, though, because you have to show up all the time.
Now, did you when did the change come from you from going from actor to stand-up? Did you make a conscious decision to change that, or just slide into it?
Well, before I even went to Second City, when I was substitute teaching, in January of '64, I began going to the Hootenanny nights on Bleecker Street. That's the night of these clubs, Cafe Wah, Bitter End, when the regular act wasn't performing. So, very rare to find a comedian there.
And you'd be a little after Bob Dylan then. Bob Dylan would have been 62,
well, we saw him at Gertie's Folk City.
Oh, man.
Yeah. 62, 63, maybe 61. One of my friends immediately scoffed up his first album. He was a big favorite. I used to go down there and stand up, and I had a few good nights, 10 minutes. And a big guy that owns the Bitter End, Freddie Weintraub, he just died. He wound up doing Bruce Lee films, He said, "You're a good kid. You're leaning against a car on Bleecker Street." And I got cocky. I said, "Hey, how about hiring me?" He said, "Well, not so fast." So I did 3 weeks in a row, good 10 minutes. And the 4th week, not so good. And the 5th week, not so good. So there was a technique required. And Second City fixed that, because while introducing Fred Willard or Steinberg in the next sketch, I'd do a minute and a half. So I was polished by the time I came back to New York. I got the Broadway show. I started to go to the Improv. And I always wanted to be everything, because it would keep me working and keep me interested. If I was just an actor for hire, then I'd have to wait for the next part. Stand-up, I could always work. And there's an ego-satisfying thing that's hard to escape.
Sure.
In one, taking the bows, which is why I don't need live theater. There's nothing like being live. But with a show, you must create it like a vintage Italian deli. Each time you got to make it. They're not pre-made,
right.
and that's beautiful. But I get those rocks off with the stand-up, I did the Exonerated. Do you remember that?
I did.
Did you do it too? Wasn't that touching when those guys, those stories, and the guy used to come with his baby? This guy was raped 1,000 times in a Texas. I mean, you know, it was horrible. All these people were bona fide innocent, including the woman whose husband was fried. They stopped the electrocutions in Florida because his hair caught on fire. According to our story, and I believe her, they were innocent jerks in this car when there's ex-con, blah, 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 and so forth. That was fun. You could read from the book, and it was 2 weeks, and you know, but to hook up with the show, there's interest in me in a lot of things, but I just wouldn't want to do it again. I love my freedom, and
How much are you still like writing? Do you still write new stuff?
well, I improvise. I get on the stage and I improvise, and when I remember what I did, I write it down. You know, I knew, and
And it just becomes a hunk.
my
naturally.
memory is as good as ever. I do take Prevedon, you know, that new memory thing.
I don't.
It's advertised on television. It's made from something found in jellyfish, and I find it improves my memory. I do have an enormous amount of guilt that there's a forgetful jellyfish going around. You haven't seen that commercial?
I have not.
It's one of these phony, you know, there's no money. Like, since Americans are living longer, there is, that's where the money is. Pat Boone has something for you. These guys are advertising, what's that male hormone?
Testosterone?
Testosterone, or you're kidding yourself, especially if you're young and you want children. Your sperm count goes to zero when because you stop producing sperm. Your body is tricked.
Should I stop eating jellyfish then?
Stop eating jellyfish.
Okay.
They sting. No, but this one's Prevagen, the largest selling memory. You take things for your heart. Why not take it for your memory? They're all baloney, you know. I get up to take a leak 6 times a night. If someone can cure me of that. I mean, I got a prostate the size of a Rocky Ford cantaloupe, and there's nothing I can do about it. I don't want it scraped or anything. By the way, you brought up your juggling before. I'm a tremendous W.C. Fields fan.
Oh, sure.
And I went to a symposium, whatever you want to call it, the National Arts Club a few weeks ago, and his granddaughter was there, and I had never met her. I know his grandson, Ronald. He lives, I believe, in Northern California, but she's Dr. Fields. She has been she's taught nursing in Uganda, and she's expert on her. You know, he has always knocked me out. I mean, the Marx Brothers, W.C.
Did you ever meet Groucho?
Laurel and Hardy, huh?
Did you know Groucho?
I had a correspondence and a few meetings with Groucho at the end. He saw me in my first Tonight Show host, and he wrote me a letter. What a thrill. I laughed so hard I almost fell off my secretary's knee, he said. And Bernadette Peters was one of my guests, and she was talking about cockroaches. She was cute. And he said, "Boy, you saved that girl with the cockroaches, blah, blah, blah. So next time you come out to the West Coast, give me a call, and I'll buy you dinner. And if I really like you, I'll give you breakfast, too." So I came out to do Love American Style. I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think I just got a 25-cent residual. It was shown in Belgium temporarily. So I call him, and we're working at Paramount, and he's Groucho, this is Robert Klein. You remember? You said, I remember. You know, these old guys. I used to give my name to George Burns every time I saw him, too. He said, I remember. You know, I wouldn't remember, to be honest. So I said, you know, I can't come to dinner. He said, can you come to dinner? I said, I can't, Groucho. We're shooting at night. The shooting is night. He said, can you come to dinner? Well, I said, well, we can't. We're shooting at night. He said, well, can you come to dinner? You know, and I don't know if it's the mini strokes or he's Grouchoing me. So I said, you said if you really liked me, you'd give me breakfast. He said, come for breakfast. So I went to his house in Beverly Hills. He's got a gorgeous nurse, not in a uniform. He's had a hospital bed, but he got up in his black pajamas. He's running around. And he had a picture of, I forgot her name, his girlfriend, because I was all for her.
Oh, really?
She gave him 7 more years of life. He adored her. And his son Arthur sued her afterwards and lost. She was honest.
Yeah.
And he was, you know, he said, I don't eat, I don't drink, I don't fuck. He says, but if I had to give up one of these, and he points to his honorary Oscar and picture of her, and he said, you know which one it would be? And he points to the Oscar. And then she surprised him. I was there about 2.5 hours. She walks in, his face lit up, you know, and all that. And also that wonderful night at Carnegie Hall where Marvin Hamlish played for him, although he was terrified, Groucho, mounted policemen, crowds. he was cranky. Friends of mine that said he was a pain in the ass to women out here. He was, kind of nasty. But I did not only hear Teller's voice once. We were on a plane together, but Harpo's voice. It's online, and he sounds like a gentle Groucho.
Yeah.
I always wanted to hear his voice.
Well, they were identical, the three of them. I mean,
what do you mean, their accents?
Off stage, the accents, they look so much alike. I mean, in the gag they do at Night of the Opera, where they're doing the mirror gags.
That was
Harpo and Chico.
the mirror gag was the one about the war.
That's Duck Soup. Duck Soup.
Well, they were so different. Chico, I knew his daughter. She was a casting agent in New York for commercials. Maxine. He stopped anything that moved, and he was married, and he also was a degenerate gambler.
Hence the term Chico.
Gambler. Are you a gambler?
No.
Well, you live in Las Vegas.
You're really trying to catch him on this.
I think it's not surprising. It's amazing and admirable too. Chico was, they had to save him in those lousy pictures at the end. Harpo was an angel. He met his wife on the set of International House. She was one of the teacups in the Field's vehicle, and they had 4 adopted children.
Yep.
And Groucho's daughter said when she was a kid, her parents were always screaming at each other. He had 2 beautiful wives who were alcoholics, and he was probably tough to live with. She'd get on her bike and go to Harpo's house, where there was peace and love. And
Michael Goudot, who's on this show with us, but now he's out doing a juggling gig. Goudot has 2 adopted children, and when he was adopting them, I sent him over Harpo Speaks, because Harpo's book about how he dealt with the adoption and telling the children that they went all over the world to try to find the perfect child, and his children always said that they felt sorry for any children who weren't adopted.
Yeah.
Because Harpo made them feel so good.
Apparently, they were very nice children. John was a musician. Mm-hmm. But, I said to Groucho when I was at his house that time having breakfast, I said, what do you think what is the definitive Marx Brothers book? Is it Harpo Speaks? Without a beat, he goes, Harpo didn't write that, It's true. I wrote my book, The Amorous Busboy of Decatur Avenue, available and incredibly cheap at this point on Amazon. Have you ever seen Tony Schwartz, who really wrote Art of the Deal?
Yeah.
He is deep, and he's terrified of this presidency and the fact that he spent more time with him and this kind of,
I believe the more time you spent with Donald Trump, the more unhappy you are with his president.
He knew him well. And, and also we knew him well, but we laughed. He was kind of like, in New Yorkers, we all knew him.
In his place, he was fine. As a reality show host, nothing wrong with that.
Well, he left the banks in the lurch. He left a lot of workmen in the lurch.
Yeah, that's true. He certainly fucked up Atlantic City wicked bad.
Yeah. You used to work there too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me it was a real thrill. Lee Solomon opened it up for William Morris. They, it's closer to my home and all that. Yes, they're all closed now, and like a lot of things that he did. Enough of him. It's not even funny, man.
No, there's not.
I don't even. I'll say I was nominated for a Tony for the playing, so I didn't win. It was rigged. Yeah. I can little things get in. But talking about him, it doesn't even pay anymore.
It's very, 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 very unhappy. So I love that you're a W.C. Fields fan. Who are the other heroes of comedy for you?
The Marx Brothers, the Laurel and Hardy, Chaplin, not in the talkies. The Great Dictator is so admirable because he was warned by all the Jewish heads of the studios, don't do that. Hitler is a good customer for our films. Modern times, of course, I admire Buster Keaton very much. I also admire Harold Lloyd, but he's not really as funny as the others, and the Stooges too.
Love the Stooges.
Well, I did a night a few years ago.
So someone is going to take Mel Gibson aside and tell him that the Stooges were Jewish. Someone going to do that?
Why is he like them?
Mel, he's a Stooge freak.
Oh.
And I always wonder,
He knows they're Jewish.
shouldn't someone tell him? Horowitz, Feinstein, Horowitz.
I did an evening for the New York Comedy Festival in which we presented 12 clips. It was devoted to the Three Stooges. And Moe's grown son and daughter were guests. And they're elegant, Beverly Hills people, UCLA graduates. He couldn't wait to run home from the studio to be with them. He was a true father. Jerome Curly was, he'd pull the tablecloth in restaurants and pay for the china, that kind of thing. And he died young. He lived very tenuous. I think he may have sired one child. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so.
But also one of my guests was Larry's sister.
Oh, yeah. We
A
all know Larry's sister.
76-year-old little Jewish woman who, unfortunately for her, looked exactly like Larry from the Three Stooges. A genetic luck certainty. And it was so interesting because these were true lives. When Harry Cohn signed them, he gave them $1,000 a week. And 25 years later or whatever, that's what they were still getting. And if it wasn't for television, then finally there's that mea culpa on an old Mike Douglas show of Moe regretting the violence that they may have had until I had a routine about it. Boop, boop, kids are waiting. There's a fractured skull or two in every community with the shows. And while I was talking to these beautifully dignified people that evening, it was all I could do to keep from smacking each and every one of them. And more importantly, putting my pinkies under their nostrils and lifting.
There was a wonderful story when we were playing, I think, like the Academy of Music or something in Philly, and there was a deli across the street that all the entertainers went to, and there was a very, very elderly server there, and the story she told, which is undoubtedly apocryphal but still so wonderful, was that the Three Stooges were playing in Philly, and one of the servers came over to them as they were sitting eating and said, you don't seem very much like the Three Stooges sitting here quietly. And they said, oh, okay. And then smashed all the plates and stood up and threw food around. And undoubtedly not true, but boy, we want to believe it, don't we?
Yeah, one more thing. Jana Ritz is a friend of mine, and she's in Spain, and her father was Harry Ritz, and sired her when he was 76. They just don't do it for me. Mel Brooks once said he was the funniest man in the world.
Yeah,
their films, and they got real feature films, which the Stooges did not.
Right.
The Stooges had a catch and catch can. Their early production values, because I have the entire set, are much better than later. I mean, the same wall and every thing, but. Talking about Fields again, I can understand how you could, number one, you're basically based here, but he brought his trick pool table to South Africa and Germany. He was the highest paid juggler in the world. He was the eccentric juggler.
Yeah, the Great McGonagall shows his whole act, yeah.
Who does?
It's called the Great McGonagall. It's part of an old-fashioned way.
No. It's called old-fashioned way. He does the cigar box.
Yeah.
And absolutely, that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorites of his films, because he was still young and vibrant enough. The drinking hadn't gone on so long, it was long enough, that he still had the agility to do his juggling, and the kind of energy, and also you see a abridged version of the American morality play, The Drunkard, with actors that probably played it, that were certainly born in the 19th century. Old-Fashioned Way is one of my absolute favorites. But the hassle of traveling with equipment, which is what you've done in your career, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have road managers.
It's what Steve Martin said. If you desperately want to be in show business and have no talent, you become a magician.
He said it, not you. You're fine. You're off the hook on that one.
I don't even know how do you actually invent these things?
It's just it's more work than anybody else would be willing to do. That's all. It's just you see us do something and you go, that I'd be willing to put in 4 or 5 hours for that, and it's really 400 or 500. That's the difference. That's the only magic to it.
Joe Cates used to work with, produce David Copperfield. He once explained to me I didn't even know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
You could tell all you want. Tell me how the trick works. But also, it always, I assume you're a Harry Houdini fan.
Oh, sure.
What I love about him is his morality. Towards the end of his career, especially with the psychics and having these special shoes made so he could explore and then his argument and fight with Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a mystic and couldn't believe when he made an elephant disappear, something that it was.
Oh no! Well, Conan Doyle would sit and talk with Houdini, and explain to him that he knew that he was able to dematerialize parts of his body to be able to do these escapes, and Houdini would say, No, I don't do that.
I know.
And it drove, it was a very weird relationship because Houdini was not well educated, tough guy, and Conan Doyle was everything Houdini wanted to be. Wonderful writer, accepted, all that stuff, very intelligent, and yet Conan Doyle would say crazy shit, and it really tore both of them apart. It was very difficult for both of them.
I'll tell you what, this is fantastic. I'm really enjoying this. I have to tell you something. Johnny, of course, did magic in his youth, and I did a show at the bitter end when I was more or less starting. One of the acts I opened for was Dr. Ireland. Do you remember him?
Yeah, I know the name.
So Dr. Ireland would collect questions.
Right.
They write them on paper.
Billet reading.
People came in. Huh?
It's called billet reading in magic.
Okay, and put dough on his eyes, and then wrap around. And I made a joke about it. And the guy had precognition. I said he could foretell events before they happen. I mean, he'd say, "God bless you," and I'd sneeze. I mean, it's amazing. So, in the maybe he was even on the air. We talked a lot during commercials, but he said, "Hey, son of a bitch, I hate him." He said, and it's true. My cousin Lou had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. He died maybe 18 years later, and. Yes, Lou, you will get better, and he's giving stock tips and all that. So how does he read these things? Do you know?
Yeah.
Johnny told me. There's a space here between all the wrapping you want.
The more wrapping you put on, the easier it is to see.
Really?
Because it stretches and it gets, they always put silver dollars over their eyes, and that stops it from getting into the socket.
Oh, fantastic.
So you're keeping the space there right down by your nose. As a matter of fact, one of the things that got us in trouble was our first appearance on David Letterman. We did a blindfold gag with Teller, and I say he's sitting right down here by his nose, and then I do a gesture towards his face, and he jumps back. So that was one of our first appearance on Letterman. Not one of the first, our very first. It would have been 85 or 86, yeah, right around there.
I saw him a few weeks ago. I remember when he was a kid from Indiana, came to the office. That was Jack Rollins' great. Cavett was not really a true stand-up, but a perfect fit for him was his talk show. It was superior in many ways, and the same thing with Letterman. They kind of just put him in the right thing. He looks like some Father Time.
I know.
And Paul Schaefer. I saw Paul the other night. There was a fundraiser. I was talking to Clive Davis, who has an amazing memory for an old man. But I did that show so many times, too. I mean, I used to do them. I was.
Well, you did his morning show, right?
I did his morning show. In fact, I recommended Buddy Morrow, one of his managers, said we need a producer, and I recommended Barry Sand, who was the producer for 8 or 9 years. I was at the beginning of a lot of stuff.
Well, Saturday Night Live, 5th show, yeah.
And then a year later, the 3rd year. And Lorne said, "You realize now that the kids are the stars." I said, "Yes." I gave Lorne some very bad advice in that first show. I said, "Don't do this live." There was such terror in the eyes of the actors and the staff at NBC at 30 Rock. Some of these people had not done live television since Howdy Doody in 1954. Everyone taped, And I remember Belushi complaining about the Bumblebee thing. I don't think it's funny. I said, stick with it. It's funny. And I remember they had the Great Favog, and they had those puppets. They were trying things. And I remember him coming to the office, too, Lorne Michaels, asking Jack Rollins for advice. seems to have done quite well. And how it's survived all these is amazing. It really is.
It really is, yeah.
And I thought the first cast, I saw Chevy the other night too, at this thing in Chappaqua, in Bedford, New York. I thought the original cast, of course, Billy joined it the second year. I think they were the best in the first years, really. Gilda Radner was one of the funniest women, and Madeline Kahn was one of my best friends too. Peter Boyle and Madeline Kahn were my oldest friends in show business. They both died young. But Madeline and Gilda both died of ovarian cancer. Two of the funniest women I ever knew. They said, well, women in comedy, it's not feminine, in those days. And now, things are changing.
Yeah, well, all the it's
Hey, adapters, but for a huge 45.
Huge 40.
That's a 92. That's not a 45.
Sir, thank you so much.
Well, man, it's great to see you. You really
What a pleasure. to
and
speak to
please say hello to Teller.
I
and
will.
He'll answer you in mime.
Okay.
This was really great.
Really a blast.
Thank you so much.
That was Penn.
So where am I? In the South?
Yeah,
The
say
South
it again.
Point.
I better know because I have another show tonight.
I was going to say you're at the South Point when
Yeah.
you're here in Las Vegas, and then
And there's gambling there. I'm shocked. Gambling.
Shocked.
So you don't gamble either,
No,
right?
I don't. Damn.
Do you like living here?
I don't care where I live. This is
No
like-
kidding.
I don't care at all. I have good parking at the theater. That's all.
Oh, wow.
That's why I can tell real show business.
Do you take time off, though?
We just had to because Tell had a back operation. But before that, never. Before that, we'd never gone more than 2 weeks without a show. Yeah, since I was 12, I believe.
And you like it that way?
Yeah. So
Well, while you're young and vibrant, why not? I used to feel that way, but now I don't have that
Yeah.
surge.
But when Bob Dylan came to our show, and where he's out back to have a cigarette, and he goes, "Is that your car?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "You parked that near to your dressing room?" I went, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, that's great."
Parking spots are great.
That's what show business is.
Well, this was better than going to church. Thanks, Penn. And thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah, cha-cha-cha. You become naked. Robert Klein. You believe that?
It's unreal.
We talk enough about improv for you?
No.
That's Matt's thing. He's a real improv.
Panties nailed to the wall. They broke all the rules in that place, and it's still very functional. So I went on the radio tour when I was 7 years old.